Good evening. I'm Meg Duguid, and I'm the Director of Exhibitions for the Department of Exhibition, Performing, and Student Spaces at Columbia College, Chicago. I want to welcome you to Breaking Down Plastics, Building Up Solutions. This is the final program for Third Coast Disrupted Artists and Scientists on Climate, an exhibition of newly commissioned artworks culminating from a year-long conversation between 7 artists and 7 scientists centered on climate change, impacts, and their solutions in the Chicago region. It's a feat to put together an exhibition of newly commissioned work and then add to that facilitating a discussion among 14 scientists and artists that are both acknowledge the very real effects of climate change while focusing on solution-oriented ideas. For this, we have needed a village. This program was created through a collaboration between Columbia College Chicago, DePaul University's Institute for Nature and Culture, and Terracom. We also couldn't have done it without sponsors and supporters, and especially with the support of the Illinois Arts Council Agency and the Illinois Science and Energy Foundation. The exhibition is open again. After a small stint being closed, we just reopened again on the 1st, and we invite you to join us in person at the exhibition, which is on view at the Glass Curtain Gallery in Chicago.
Greyhound woman.
Through
yeah, she's the organizer of this.
February 19th. I would ask that you mute your microphones, please. So the exhibition is on view through February 19th. Or you can come visit us at thirdcoastdisrupted.org or colum.edu/thirdcoast, where you can take a virtual tour and learn more about the artists and scientists involved. I actually can't believe we've made it to the final presentation. It has been such an amazing feat to kind of get through this project, and with COVID, and we extended the show, and this program is kind of came out of that extension. So it's been really exciting. So now I'm going to introduce Christine, the project director and lead curator of Third Coast Disrupted. She's the founder of Terracom, a 30-year-old environmental communications firm whose exchange project brings together collaborators to create art and science initiatives like Third Coast Disrupted.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Meg. You can hear me okay? Yes. Thank you, Meg, and thank you all for joining us this evening, this snowy evening. We're really excited about this panel. We're excited about our panelists, and it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists. And we'll start with Barbara Cooper, who is an artist and Third Coast Disrupted participant who works primarily in sculpture, drawing, and public art. She embeds sustainability and an ecology of wholeness in her work through the use of repurposed materials, diverse materials, including wood, metal, paper, glass, and found objects. Her work is in the collections of the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago, the Smithsonian National Museum of American Art, the Illinois State Museum, and more. Tyrone Dobson is a senior volunteer engagement manager for the Alliance for the Great Lakes, overseeing all of the Alliance's volunteer programs. They include Adopt a Beach, engaging over 15,000 volunteers in beach cleanups across the 8-state Great Lakes region, the Chicago Ambassador Program, and the Alliance's Chicago Young Professional Council. He brings a wealth of experience in volunteer management and has worked with volunteers from all socioeconomic backgrounds in the US and Canada. Tim Hoellein is an aquatic ecologist and associate professor in the biology department at Loyola University, Chicago. His research focuses on measuring the sources, fate, and biological interactions of pollutants in freshwater ecosystems. In addition to contributing to scholarly research, Dr. Hoellein seeks connections for direct applications of his work to policy, environmental management, and education. Well, we will jump right in, and I'll give you a little bit of the lay of the land before we get started. We are going to have roughly 5 minutes of presentation from each of our panelists about their work relative to our topic. I'm going to ask some questions, and then we're also going to save plenty of time for you, our attendees, to ask some questions as well. We're hoping for we know there will be a very interesting conversation, And the order of our presentations will be Tim, Tyrone, and then Barbara. So Tim, take it away.
Okay, am I all right on the screen? Yeah. Hello, everyone. Good evening, and thanks for having me here. I'm always really happy to talk about our work on trash, and happy that people are interested. So I'll start with an image. This is a picture of a cobra that has bitten a python. And so while the python is dying of the venom, it's strangled the cobra to death. So these two snakes killed each other. It's an amazing picture. This is actually the picture. This is zoomed out. I saw this online and there were a lot of comments about the snakes because they're incredible. But I was also thinking about the background. This is taking place on what looks like a ditch or a dry stream, maybe, and it's filled with garbage. And I was thinking of this as an example of how we can come to a place where we accept that nature kind of carries on despite a background of human impacts, especially of pollution. And we see this a lot. The term, the normative power of the actual is a kind of a fancy way of saying you get used to things, and when you get used to things, you stop seeing them. And plastic litter in general is one of those things that we can kind of allow to fade into the background of our vision. But when we're forced to really look at litter, especially plastic in the environment, we start to ask some questions. And so in my work, I've been asking these kind of basic questions about trash in the environment. Where does it come from? Where does it go? How does it interact with living things along the way? And so we're not the only ones doing this. Sure, it's obvious in an urban area like where we live, but this is a global field of study, and it takes place even in remote corners of the world where no one lives. And the Anthropocene Era is a term that geologists have developed to kind of describe all of the different components of global change that are leaving a permanent imprint on the geologic record of the Earth. So novel entities is a term that's meant to connote synthetic chemicals. So all the various kinds of materials that people produce, like plastic, like pharmaceuticals, like nanoparticles. And this is combined with other aspects of global change, like changing climate, loss of biodiversity, or the way we alter our landscape. In this particular presentation, I'm just going to point out two ways in which I think the plastic and climate change aspects of global change are connected. So we work with volunteer groups like the Alliance for the Great Lakes, Friends of the Chicago River, and Shed Aquarium. In this particular set of projects, volunteers are out picking up litter, which is great. But what's even better is that they're keeping track of what they find. So this is a tally sheet that we give to volunteer kayakers in the river. And as they pick up litter and bring it back, we have them kind of jot down the number of items that they find. Here's one category of materials kind of zoomed in for medical and personal hygiene products. And here's some results. This is the litter that was picked up by volunteer kayakers in the Chicago River in 2019. And you can see they picked up about 5,000 litter items, and this was our first year of the program. Most of that was plastic and styrofoam, and styrofoam is also plastic. And much of that was food-related materials, fragments of items, and then also an important product, that category of products we see that are hygiene products. And you might wonder, why are personal hygiene products in the river? And it's really tightly connected to our sewage system. So Chicago sewage system, like many other cities of its age, is built to overflow raw sewage into the river when there's too much rain. We just don't have the capacity to hold on to it. So we've had a lot of improvements in that sewage infrastructure, but the sewage does release all sorts of materials, including plastic, into the river when it rains. And with climate change predictions for this region, our expectation is more precipitation and more intense storms. And so we expect this to be one way in which the changing climate is adding pollution, in particular plastic, to our waterways. The second way that I want to point out is plastic is derived from fossil fuels. So it's part of that industry of climate change. And while it is persistent in the environment, it will eventually break down into greenhouse gases. So this is a really brief summary by another group, Geyer and colleagues. They put together an analysis of all the plastic that was ever made between 1950 and 2015. And they found of all that plastic, about 30% is still in use, sort of year on year. About 55% has been discarded to landfills or to the environment. About 8% has been burned through incineration, and about 6% has been recycled. So there's room, I suppose, for improvement in the recycling. But the other point of this is that the material which is discarded and burned is breaking down over time. And it'll break down into smaller pieces of plastic, microplastics, nanoplastics, and it will release an array of gases, some of which we know to be greenhouse gases. So this is just kind of two ways I think that the study of plastic in the environment is connected to our climate. It's really linked to our infrastructure. It's linked to weather, especially stormwater, and through the action of the fossil fuel industry and how that's connected to plastic production. But I would also point out that there are many other aspects of global change in the Anthropocene, all of which are interconnected, and all of which will be sort of pushing us into this new era of the history of the Earth, where the activity of people is now a permanent part of our geologic record. So I just want to thank people who support our work. And that's it for me. Christine.
Great introduction, a wonderful way to get started. Thank you, Tim. And we're off to Tyrone.
All righty, let me get things pulled up here. And can you see my screen? Awesome. All righty, so I'm going to talk a little bit building off of what Tim is talked a little bit about here. My name is Tyrone Dobson. As you heard in the introduction, I'm the Senior Volunteer Engagement Manager over at the Alliance for the Great Lakes. So working with anywhere from 15 to 20,000 volunteers all across the Great Lakes every year. It is a huge feat for a very small crew of folks, but I'm happy to do it and happy to talk to you a little bit more about plastic pollution and ways that you can think about like how you connect to that. So when I give presentations, I always like to start out with just a general, what I say, like your bar trivia fun facts about the Great Lakes, so that if you ever find yourself, when we are able to go back to in-person trivia nights, you have some fun facts in your back pocket. So I'm originally from Tennessee. You probably are going to hear that throughout my presentation. But when I moved here, one of the things that was most striking to me is the Great Lakes. Many people that live in Chicago oftentimes think of it as just like the lake. It's there, it's a body of water, it is what it is. But it is a huge body of water and a huge resource to our area. 1 in 10 US citizens, 1 in 4 Canadians get their drinking water from the Great Lakes. It was a huge, huge, huge resource. And I don't think that we think about it in as large of terms that it is. It's the largest surface freshwater system in the entire world. Like huge, huge resource here, guys, just to paint a picture as to what we're talking about. Now, in relation to our topic today, there is a lot of plastic in that body of water as well. The Rochester Institute of Technology estimates that, give or take 22 million pounds of plastic enter the Great Lakes every single year. That is a lot of plastic. And so I just want to make sure that, it was when I was thinking about this presentation, thinking about how great and how large of an ecosystem the Great Lakes is compared to how much plastic enters into it every year was truly startling to me. And it's something that, it's hard to think about that. One of the things that I've talked to quite a bit with people is that, I don't know what 1 million pounds looks like, let alone 22 million. But what I can tell you is that is a lot. So, and it's not great for for the people that, get their drinking water from there, let alone the 3,500 different species of animals that call the Great Lakes home. So I think it's important to talk a little bit about plastic pollution in contrast to what we hear about from our partners on the ocean, right? So on the East and West Coast, it's something to think about. So thinking about our plastic, it's generally really, really tiny. When I do beach cleanups, one of the things that's always the most comical to me is when people go out to our beaches and they expect to see like the refrigerator and the 55-gallon drum and all of these types of things that we see in other remote parts of the world. Now, there's a lot of trash at our beaches, but it's typically really, really tiny. To put that into perspective, around 90% of what we find at our beach cleanups is partially or completely made of plastic. So I thought of all of the, in an average year, anywhere from 40 to 50,000 pounds of trash, we remove 90% of that will be plastic. And most of it is tiny, tiny pieces. Last year, in a much abbreviated year, our top 3 items of litter that was removed from Great Lakes beaches was the number 1 was plastic pieces, number 2, foam pieces, which are plastic, and the third being cigarettes and cigarette filters. So you can see tiny, tiny pieces of stuff that we uncover at our beach cleanups. Also thinking about that, there's nothing more satisfying to me to drill this issue home to people when we go to cleanups, when they go to the beach. And in Chicago, the Park District rakes the sand every morning. They clean it, looks beautiful, ready for beachgoers. My volunteers are very upset. They're like, what? We're not going to find any trash on the beach. 5 minutes later, they have handfuls of tiny nurdles and tiny pieces of microplastic and other pieces of debris that are broken down into small, small items. Something else to think about is that this, as I told you earlier, a lot of folks get their drinking water from the Great Lakes. Those tiny pieces of plastic are in our drinking water. And tied to a later point, there's not a lot of research as to what that means to us, the people that drink the water, right? So tiny pieces of plastic in the water, you drink water, plastic in you. I don't really know what that means for my body, as I am not a doctor of science or a doctor of anything for that matter, but I know that it's not great. I can't imagine that it's good. Something else to think about is that a lot of this trash washes out and not up. So a lot of the trash that are in the plastic that enters the Great Lakes is because we've left it behind and it's made its way to the water system. It's not like where you can literally just like watch items wash ashore, which you do see, but that it's entered because it's been put out there in the first place. We've all seen any one of the beaches in the city after air and water show or after a really nice, beautiful summer day and what type of debris is left behind. And that stuff gets carried right out into the lake, which has really, really grave impacts to the Great Lakes. The last 2 things here is that the water is different, so it has different types of impacts on that plastic to begin with. So freshwater versus saltwater. Probably more into Tim's sphere of knowledge about how that interacts, but it's important to point out that those 2 things equal different outcomes for the plastic. And the last one I'll tell you is that there's less research about what this means for our ecosystem. There's folks like Tim that are doing great work to understand this issue, but there's not a huge library or catalog of research, right? These are new things that we're discovering, and the impacts that it has on not only the people that live in the Great Lakes, but the animals as well is really limited in scope. So a lot of people end up thinking, well, what can I do, right? And a lot of people always go to, well, there should be, large systemic change that should happen on the federal level to stop plastics from being made or to have bag bans and things like that. And some of that stuff has happened. So the Alliance for the Great Lakes worked many years ago to work on a national ban of microbeads. So you might remember this with your face wash or body wash. It had little bitty plastic pieces in it that were used for exfoliation. Friendly tip, if you still have something that has that in there, you probably have really, really, really old facial exfoliant. Get rid of that. But beyond that, we worked to get those things banned. What happened is that it got into our water system and those things have bad impacts for us. So there's things that are happening on the national scale, and there's conversations that continue to happen that talk about ways to mitigate plastic into our environment. But there are things that you can do as an individual as well, which I'll touch on really briefly. So 2 ways that I can think about right off the bat is volunteerism. Whether it's through our Adopt a Beach program or our Alliance Ambassadors program, you can have an impact by either removing trash, and most of which is plastic, from our beaches, or as an ambassador where you're talking to people and educating them on the issues themselves. Both of these roles have huge impacts for those in the Great Lakes. couple other ways. Educating your family and friends. There's a ton of folks on this call tonight. I'd encourage you to take some information that you learned tonight and share it with your family and friends. So just don't sit on that information just so that you are more educated. Educate your family and friends. The more that they know, the more that they can do. I truly believe that people don't know how pervasive of a problem this is. And so a little bit of education goes a long way. A couple of personal things you can do. The Alliance for the Great Lakes has a plastic-free pledge, which is basically your commitment to use less plastic along the lines of reduce, reuse, recycle. And lastly, I'd encourage you to take a challenge yourself to a week without single-use plastics. I've done that at work, and it's an extremely challenging task. I thought it would be easy. It's not. And it really starts to help you understand your individual contribution to the plastic pollution problem. And once you understand how you're contributing, you can also figure out how you can reduce. And so that starts with a level of awareness as to how you do that. If you can't make it a week, do it one day. And I guarantee you'll see how your daily practices have a negative impact to the plastic pollution problem. People, I heard a person say, we're all part of the problem, but we also can all be part of the solution. And that starts with just a little bit of accountability and a little bit of acknowledgement of where you play into the puzzle. So that's a couple of ways you can get involved. And I definitely look forward to talking more with the rest of the panelists today about plastic pollution.
Excellent. Thank you, Tyrone. Barbara, these two have now set up Barbara and her artwork.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me here. And let's see. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, what I'd like to do is, this panel actually came out of the exhibition that Christine organized at the Glass Curtain Gallery. And I want to give you a little bit of information about where the ideas for my work have come from, and also about my process with the work. So what we're looking at here are two images of rock formations. And what I love about these is that we're looking at something that we know is a rock hard material, but it was formed in a very fluid manner. And I'm interested in that juxtaposition and tension between fluidity and rigidity, and also this kind of embedded energy that we see in here, and also the strata or layering of the work. Okay, these are some images of some different kinds of rocks, and what I love about these are that there's two different materials, one embedded in the other, and they form these kind of very strange configurations. So here's some earlier work. This is a piece that's made out of layers of wood veneer and books that are cut up on a bandsaw. And kind of building off of what you just saw, I'm interested in how this juxtaposition between the softness of the paper, the hardness of the wood, and also that the embedding of the ideas in the books, and the embedding, say, that what we would see in a tree, cross-section of a tree stump, where we see all of the rings of growth. There's another piece kind of also, and again with this energy and fluidity, and something that's quite solid. So in 2016, I came across some images of these rocks. These are called plastic glomerates, and they were they've been found by geologists in Hawaii, and they are made from people burning plastics and other materials in campfires, where the plastics have fused with the silica and the sand and wood ash and various other kinds of materials. This one is, you can see, all plastic bottles and caps. Okay, so here we're starting with some of material that I worked with for the pieces that are in the exhibition. And it came out of some experiments I had done a while ago, which you can see in the lower left-hand side of the screen, using aluminum window screening and chicken wire that I manipulated. And if you go right up above that to the upper left is the beginnings of this piece that you see on the right-hand side. And I was embedding plastic bottles that I found. It was in the spring, snow was melting, and there was tons of trash. It's all in my neighborhood. I took these water bottles home, cleaned them up, and was struck with the irony that they all had these very glamorous names of trees, pure water, etc. And here they all were, trash in my neighborhood. So then these screen forms, I ladled thinned down abaca paper pulp onto, there's many, up to maybe about 30 layers of pulp until it starts to form a skin. And on the right, you can see how it's starting to become a little bit more opaque. And here I am painting a very thin coating of beeswax that is then I fuse into the paper with a heat gun. So I wind up with this material that I think is very skin-like and very vulnerable, and it's sutured together with wire with these manipulated plastic bottles that are seeping out. I'm very interested that these kind of reference almost like an organ of digestion that we might find in our own bodies or animal, but like gills of a whale. Because I really feel that we're no longer able to digest all of this plastic that we're putting into the earth. This is the beginnings of another element, the installation that I have in the gallery called Seep. It has about 6 pieces to it. This was one of the other one. It started in the lower right-hand side with these little cellular structures made out of screening compressed together. And you can see in the upper right where I've stitched in these manipulated plastic bottles. And this is how I'm kind of laying it out in the studio to kind of imply a connection between these 3 forms. And this is what it winds up looking like once the paper pulp and the wax is on it. And there you have it. That's what that total form looked like as it's finished. So I hope you can get to the gallery and see the finished work. Thanks.
Beautiful, Barbara. I'd like to use that as a jumping off point, actually, talking about the artworks. And the first question I want to pose to you all is, what role or roles have the arts played in building awareness and potentially spurring action in this issue? And what are ways to build on that?
I'll start. I think that different people are drawn to this, like, I guess the easiest way to say is, like, people are drawn to things for different reasons, right? And I think about that in relation to how people have gotten involved in our Adopt a Beach program. Anytime our Adopt a Beach program has been paired with something artistic in any way, we see a huge spike in the number of participants because people are intrigued. It's something a little bit different. I think oftentimes when you tell people no more plastic, or you need to reduce, or you do this, or you that, they feel very lectured to, and people turn off to that. And so it's really, I don't really care how they get the epiphany. And if it can be done through art, I'm happy that that's happened. As long as that breakthrough moment has happened to the people, I'm happy. But I know that I can see that from on my end as a person that works with folks to get them involved in projects like this.
I can offer that same sentiment. We talk about with my students, how science, while it can convince people with facts, it doesn't always move people. And I think in order to get change to happen, whether those are personal habits or policy changes or education changes, in order to really reach someone, I think you have to speak to their emotions and senses. Facts will only get you so far, and of course are really important for grounding those decisions. But ultimately, what we need is storytelling, and I think this is where the arts are here for us.
And I guess I would add into that, I think it is hard to digest the data. And especially in this case, it's overwhelming. And I think many people just feel like stuck with it. But hopefully, I mean, my goal as an artist is to bring awareness, to get you to look at maybe something that you wouldn't want to look at in real life. And that can then become a metaphor for the greater situation. But I also think that awareness of something is the first step towards change.
Yes, it's interesting what you all say. It's actually what drives Third Coast Disrupted Artists and Scientists on Climate. Why we did this exhibition was for it to be another way to engage people. Instead of the facts, as Tim says, we need the facts, but to reach them on the emotional, visceral level and be kind of an entry point. So that's interesting. And Tyrone, your experiences with that is really interesting to me. I want to ask you, since we're talking about art as a way to engage people in this topic, are there other disciplines that other types of professionals or other types of volunteers that that could be more engaged, could help with this effort, or should be engaged more to advance the issue?
I think there's quite a bit to be said about those in the health and wellness space connecting on this issue on a whole bunch of fronts. One of the most interesting cleanups I've attended, and mind you, I attend about 50 to 60 cleanups a year, was a yoga-based cleanup. And so they started their experience by doing yoga at the very beginning and had a lot of conversation about like the connection to person to the environment. And I think for those people, I think you really start to see a lot of light bulbs go off when they started to like mix in some of the facts of like the actual data that Tim was speaking about earlier, mixed with the like the spiritual connection to one with the environment, which is huge. So I think that was just a really interesting take. And I never had thought about it or heard it communicated in that way. So I thought that was really interesting. I think that could speak to a lot of folks. In addition to that, though, on the other side of like the health and wellness space, there's a lot of like single-use plastics used in that space, i.e. water bottles and things like that. And so I think, gyms and other places like cutting back on those things, providing water refill stations and things like that, like practical solutions could go a long way as well.
I think one of the really satisfying aspects of doing this kind of science is it's so interdisciplinary. So it's so nice to be able to work with Tyrone and volunteers and to speak at something like this. So I find that really satisfying. I think one element that I've sometimes struggled to engage with, but I think I really would need to, and the field as a whole needs to, is social science and environmental justice. When it comes to plastic pollution, water bottles, hygiene products, these are all activities and discussions and volunteering that can sometimes have a class element to it, and it can be a similar class of people engaged in those activities. And I think we're in a much better position if everyone is involved, and if everyone is included, and if everyone feels that the conversation speaks to their experience. And so I think just by nature of how this has developed, we've fallen short in that realm of inclusion. And I hope that that's a place where we can make progress.
I want to turn our attention to the elephant in the room, as it were, and that being recycling. there seems to be this lingering notion that we can recycle our way out of this problem. And I'm wondering what you all have found to be the best ways to convey that it's not that simple.
I could jump in here on this. I think that recycling has really gotten to the point where it's a big myth, and for a number of reasons. And I think this was started way back in the 60s with these bottling companies putting the onus on people that to pick up trash, which of course is a perfectly good thing to do, and we should never be just dumping our trash. But they were suggesting that recycling can be a very viable thing, and it's not. And over the course of, as long as we've been using plastics, only about 9% of it, I think, is that what you said, Tim? I can't remember, but something like that has ever been recycled, which is terrible. And so I think we really need to be thinking about putting this producer responsibility where those people that produce the plastic need to be accountable and responsible for what happens to that plastic. So that starts with plastic nurdles, which are a huge problem, the very tiny pellets that are used to make new plastic and seem to escape everywhere, especially into bodies of water. And also with recycling, because most containers now have gotten so complicated. They're a mesh of different kinds of materials that they are totally impossible to recycle.
I think one of the problems with recycling is a general lack of understanding of recycling rules. And like the actual process, right? So I think people inadvertently, by trying to do good, end up doing a bad thing, right? So if you put things that are into the recycling that are not recyclable, it can contaminate the entire bin, right? So that is in of itself a problem. And I see this all the time as folks want to do cleanups, and I get the immediate question is, I'm going to recycle, I want to do all of this work. And I was like, okay, if you do that, first, here's a link to read all of the things that can be recycled. And you have to understand that at a fundamental level, step one. Then you have to take all the trash you collect and then sort it all out to make sure you can, put all the pieces in the right place. And there's a lot to be said about understanding those rules. If you don't do that right, you're not actually doing as much good as you think you're doing. And that's truly a shame.
I guess I think the most important thing about recycling is, and they have those 3 R's, it's reduce, reuse, recycle. The one I would put actually in front of all 3 of those is refuse. I think we need to get to the point where we are no longer choosing to use single-use plastics. We have been brainwashed into thinking that convenience is the most important thing in our lives, and that we're all far too busy to ever think about anything else. But I think that plastics have actually reduced the quality of our life. I think for anyone who's ever tried to eat with a plastic fork, I think that's a very unsatisfactory situation. And I think that we need to make important choices as consumers about purchasing things either that are not packaged or that come in glass or metal containers.
Yeah, I would say, that recycling isn't the answer, and it wasn't ever really the intention of the products in the first place. There's a lot of different kinds of plastic polymers. Very few of those are recyclable. And unlike glass or aluminum, when plastic's recycled, it's not recycled back into the same product. It's downcycled into a product of lesser quality. So should a plastic item happen to be recycled even twice, it would be a poorer and poorer quality product after that recycling has occurred. And so it wasn't really the idea in the first place that it should happen. So it doesn't work really ultimately as a solution. One thing I like about it is it does cause people to think about their waste, think about what they're producing as they sort it and put it here and there. So coming face to face with it in that way might have some positive impact, but ultimately we need to think about reduction and refusal.
Let's see. Before we get to taking people's questions, there's one more question I want to ask because I don't know about you, but thinking about this issue can really be kind of, as we would say in a previous time, a bummer. It's just, it's a really heavy subject. And I want to hear about the success stories. Tyrone, you mentioned the microbeads ban. If each of you, if you have one, a success story that you can share, what's the good news and or your favorite success story?
I'll start. And so I think about success oftentimes in very individual terms. As a person that works in communities, for me, it's about the change that I'm able to get done in one person, right? So if I think about if I can get one person times 1,000, one person times 1,000,000, like I'm really taking the world by storm. And after a cleanup, like you said, with 15, 20,000 people that have had an intimate experience with plastic, trash, but most of it's plastic that they would normally not have. And there's no better way, in my opinion, to get someone to understand the issue and how bad it is to when they have to count out 400 or 500 plastic pieces. You never have that experience, ever. And you are forced to come face to face with the issue in a personal terms. And I'm convinced that leads to change and education in some way or another, and I count that as a win.
I think for me, one of the really exciting things is how much publicity this is starting to get. And I think people are hearing about what an issue plastics really have become, even though it might have started out as like, wow, this is really a great asset to our daily lives. It's just gone totally wild. But the other thing is that along with that, people are starting to open zero waste stores. I know we have one in Chicago, Eco and the Flamingo, and then there are many places online that you can buy things that do not come in containers. You bring your own, or the container is made out of paper or cardboard. The other thing is that there are lots of venues now where people can get engaged. So for instance, I'm part of a group here in Chicago called Organizing for Plastic Alternatives. We have a Facebook and website, and we are trying to do work in our ward, and but also in the city. There are initiatives that are up before City Council. There is an initiative for the state, and there is also an initiative at the national government level. And I am really hoping that something can be done, because I think it's not only about personal accountability and the kinds of choices that we're making in how we live our lives, but I think it's also got to come from the top down. This is such a complicated issue.
Yeah, I can share a success story that actually comes from the work with volunteers at Alliance for the Great Lakes. So they've been leading these beach cleanups, writing down the trash that they find on the beaches for almost 20 years. And we've been analyzing those numbers. And one of the really consistent trends we see is that the amount of cigarette butts on the beaches is going down. There's still a lot of cigarette butts out there. It's one of the top items that people will find. But when we look over a period of 10 or 15 years, we can see a decline in their abundance. And that's promising, and it's logical because it The smoking rates nationally have been going down during that period as well, as have lung cancer rates. So I think we're in a position, thanks to the activity of thousands and thousands and thousands of volunteers, keeping track of these numbers, we're in a position to say public education, rules about smoking, all the different interventions that have gone on to reduce smoking rates have had a positive public health impact and also a positive environmental health impact. And so that's a really nice way that we can sort of all work together to observe success.
Oh yeah, that's good. It's good to hear those stories. That's excellent. Let's see, Meg has been monitoring the chat for us.
So we have a couple of questions in the chat. And I'm going to start just kind of by early on. Someone talked about if they want to kind of organize their own beach cleanup, how might they go about kind of identifying a beach and getting something like that started?
Alrighty, so a couple of things. One, I will drop my email into the chat function. So if you want to set one up, contact me directly, and we can get that squared away. But very generally, finding a beach near you, I always tell folks to think about it as a level of convenience. We oftentimes get asked, well, which one needs the most help? Every last one of them. Everyone you can think of needs you. So find a location that is convenient to you. I don't want there to be I don't want distance or access to be the barrier for you going out and doing volunteerism. I want you to go where is closest to you. So you're connected to that community. I want you to have that level of buy-in to where you're going. But I definitely will drop my information here in the chat feature so you can have that. You also can check out more information at greatlakes.org/adoptabeach.
All right, and my next question is directly to Barbara. Wait, hold on. It was so eloquently written that I want to read it directly. Barbara, do you have any thoughts on the seduction of formal expression and the horror of the materials involved?
I do. I think that, and that's a great question, and I think very relevant for artists. I think that beauty is a way to look at something very ugly. And one of my favorite definitions about art is from Rudolf Arnheim. And he talks about beauty as being a balance between opposites. So, and ugly and beauty really kind of go together. I think it enables us to see something we don't want to see.
All right, I think that ends all of my questions in the chat. If anyone has any others, I feel like you could unmute yourself really quickly and ask them in person or drop them in the chat if you are not on a device that would allow you to speak.
If any of our panelists don't have any questions, I've got a couple more I can ask, or if more don't show up in the chat. I'm not seeing right now. I do have I've got a question. And it is, Tyrone, you mentioned the coast and, saltwater situation. The coastal situation is different than ours. I mean, we're the third coast, but we have a freshwater situation. And we hear a lot about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And we are able to, we know a lot of that is plastic. So we can conjure up that awesome, in a difficult way, image. What is that image for us here with the Great Lakes? And what is that compelling image for us, or can we develop for the Great Lakes and our inland waterways?
Tim might have a more like scientific answer for this, but the two that come to mind for me are just like personal experiences. One of those would be in a very general sense, like the beachfront after air and water show. Like there is nothing more startling than to see that after the fact, because it's basically people that have lived their best life and left their best lives at the beach. Like that's the way to think about it. Another like kind of similar thing, like experience I think about is like the outflow from the combined sewer overflow also is a very similar like collection of just all types of debris right there in the Chicago River. And so those are the two things that come to mind for me. But Tim, I don't know if you have any other examples of something large scale like the garbage patch.
Yeah, I would think like the 4th of July goes in line with the Air and Water Show. And yeah, yes, my feeling on this is some of the big time periods, some of the big events in which lots of trash enters our rivers is during flooding, and it then enters the Great Lakes. So if you can imagine some of the really stark images of flooding that you see go on in perhaps like the Chicago River, it's all kinds of different pollutants in there, obviously, sewage and oil and trash. But these moments of kind of disruption where our infrastructure fails us and all of these materials get into our waterways that we, prize and that we also rely on for our own health. I think that's one of the real clear images I can think of our impact. And a big difference between the Pacific garbage patch and our own backyard garbage patch is that it's our garbage. The isolated Pacific countries, or even I don't know, ocean beaches all over the world, they might have trash that came from anywhere else in the world, from international shipping or fishing, but we can't blame it on anybody else. The trash that's on our beaches is ours, and so I think that forces us to accept responsibility and hopefully also encourages us to look for local solutions.
Yeah, I think I've seen some images where they've identified the wrappers that have wrapped up all the way over, in Asia, and it's the brand or the city or wherever that it came from. But I guess one of the strongest images for me, and I think maybe as an artist, I think about related patterns between on a very large scale and on a very small scale, and how frequently we're seeing kind of the same kind of thing. But it's like, I know I've done in the cleanups I've done over at Montrose Dunes, that sometimes it's almost a relief to see a whole object like a bottle, because so much of it is this teeny tiny stuff, like the little corners that you tear off of some pre-wrapped thing, or shreds of plastic wrap, or again, this tiny broken down plastics that has become so embedded into the grasses or whatever else is growing along the water's edge there. And then you can see the next storm, sand is going to wash up on top of that, and then there's going to be another layer of plastic. So it's like it almost becomes something that's impossible to separate out. And I think that was something that I really wanted to refer to in the work that I was making, is that it's so embedded into everything, whether it's what we're finding in fish, or we're finding it in plants that are growing, we're finding it in human placentas. It is now incorporated into almost everything in the world. It's in the water, it's in the air, it's in the earth. So that's my image.
Let's see. We have 5 minutes left. And Meg, have you seen any more questions? I haven't seen any go by. If not, I have more questions.
I do not, Christine.
Okay,
Hi,
thanks.
hi. I have a question, and this is for Mr. Dobson. Could you comment on balloon debris causing pollution in the Great Lakes, and what has the Alliance for Great Lakes done more specifically for balloon debris problem?
So it's a good question. We get this quite a lot, actually. And so for those who might not be familiar with the question, you see these giant balloon releases that oftentimes are for an anniversary of something or in celebration of this or that. They get released into the air, and what goes up must come down. Like those balloons pop or whatever the case is, and they end up in the waterways. So two interesting things happen on the data front as we collect this. It's actually not in our top 10, or I don't even believe the top 15 of actual items, like actual balloons, which sounds like, oh, that can't be right, and it's not. That's because those balloon pieces are oftentimes like pieces of balloons, which oftentimes get categorized as plastic pieces. So like thinking about it that way, like we don't have like whole balloons often finding at cleanups. What we do though is that we support other, there are a lot of issues that face the Great Lakes and a lot of like micro issues, right? So balloon release being one of those. I know we support there's a local resident that has a small like coalition of folks over in West Michigan that's done quite a bit about this. And we support local partners all over the Great Lakes as they do these issues, in large part through giving them data collected through the Adopt a Beach program to help support their efforts on a local level. And so we do that all over the Great Lakes. But the Alliance itself has not taken any work or any done any work to prevent these types of balloon releases.
Thank you. Thanks for that question, and thank you, Tyrone.
And
Let's see.
there is one more question in the chat now. Someone has a student in filmmaking that they teach who's deeply concerned with plastic pollution and its effect on animals. In a sea of YouTube videos recycling the subject, where do you see that the cinema arts could be utilized best to address plastic pollution?
I personally believe that it feels very similar to the entire point of these installations that we're doing here with Third Coast Disrupted. There's a storytelling component that I think oftentimes is overlooked in solving the plastic pollution problem. And oftentimes I can't emphasize enough, seeing the problem presented in different types of ways has an impact. What doesn't reach one person could reach another. And I think there's a huge amount of success that could be had by doing things in the cinematic work versus say other types of art. I think that those things resonate with different people, and I would encourage that student to really hone in on that and really lean into that passion.
Yeah, actually, early on, I saw this film by an artist named Chris Jordan. The name of the film is Albatross, and you can see it on his Vimeo channel. And he did a whole study of what was happening with plastics, and there's a very large albatross breeding community on Midway Atoll. And these pictures that he did of the insides of their stomachs, of the mothers feeding the plastic to the baby chicks, thinking that they were giving them food, it had such a profound effect on me. And I think that was kind of really triggered something in me that I needed to really be way more active in these issues.
Wow. Yeah, you know, diversity, we talk about diversity on so many levels, and diversity of artistic media as different ways to engage people. To Tyrone's point, the more we can mix it up, the better. This has been a phenomenal discussion. Thank you, panelists. I wish, as always, I wish we had more time. We're really getting going here, but this has been really thought-provoking, and I imagine action-provoking. Before we say goodnight, I want to just kind of reiterate what Meg said earlier about the exhibition. Third Coast Disrupted, Artists and Scientists on Climate, is in its final 2 weeks. It closes February 19th. It's at the Glass Curtain Gallery, 1104 South Wabash. The gallery is very good about precautions, very thorough in its precautions, screens people upon entry, masks are required, 10-person limit in the gallery, and it's very easy to physically distance in the gallery. So I encourage you, if you're comfortable, to come out to the gallery and see the works. Seeing them in person and together is really very impactful. This isn't just me saying this. People say this in our guest book. Some wonderful comments there. That said, if you are, before I leave that topic, if you are going to the gallery, I found a parking garage that I love to use that I recommend. It's 1140 South Wabash, just a few steps from the gallery. Now, if you'd rather stay home and watch and see the works from the comfort of your home and the warmth of your home, you can go online and see it at thirdcoastdisrupted.org. It's on the home page there, where you also see more information about the exhibit and the artists and scientists. And also at Column, short for Columbia, colum.edu/thirdcoast. Same thing, there's a link to the virtual tour and to more information about the exhibition and photos and such. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists, again. Thank you for joining us this evening, and please enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.